What's going on, guys? Arekkz here. Welcome back to another video for Godfall, and today is another special one because I'm once again joined by Dick Heyne, who is the technical producer, Counterplay Games. Welcome back, man. How you doing?
Oh man, I'm doing so great. Thanks again for having me. This is I'm really looking forward to what we're going to dig in today and just learn more about Godfall.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait. Like, obviously, for those of you guys watching, we've chatted before because the last time you came on, we spoke, we revealed and spoke about Hinterclaw, which was incredibly exciting. People love that one. And today we're doing much the same because obviously this weekend was PAX. There were not one, not two, but three different videos that dropped. All of them were really cool. So you basically come like bearing spicy information, which I am so excited about.
I come bearing gifts, less conversations on beards. I know that that's what like people were really tuning in for last time. True. I saw it in the comments, but we'll try to get straight to Godfall this time. I suppose.
We'll do it. So if you guys do enjoy this, obviously don't forget to drop a like. If you guys got questions, drop them down below. But let's dive straight into it because obviously seeing that trailer, I mean, visually it's it looks incredible in that new trailer. I'm loving the vibrancy as well because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've seen anything from the Water Realm in like the previous trailers. I feel like we've seen like a lot of foresty areas and desert stuff, but seeing that, I mean, I love the colors in that. That looks incredible.
Yeah, in the past we've shown a lot of the Earth Realm. That's kind of what we've indexed into for the most part. And this was really the first time that you saw, I guess, what you could call an in-depth look at the Water Realm. And it was exciting for us. The entire team was thrilled as that trailer dropped, seeing people's reaction to the color palette and the excitement around this idea of the Water Realm. Just it was inspiring to the team, really seeing how excited folks were for that, because the Water Realm is something we've been holding near and dear to us for a long time. It was one of the first realms we really started the concept at a high level, and it was one of the first big environments that the team collectively got excited for. So it felt like a long time coming, finally getting to share that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, no, I was blown away by it because I've always liked the visual kind of style of Godfall anyway, but seeing that, like, that's definitely I can't wait to explore that. That's going to be good. But obviously, amidst that, there's a lot of stuff in the trailer. It's one of those things, you kind of go through like surface level, but obviously now we're going to chat today. There's a lot of kind of details there that I think that we kind of want to dive into. So I guess if we start and just like jump straight into talking about weak points, because I even said in my initial video, I was like, oh yeah, I'm used to weak points in video games. Like every game's got a weak point, but it's not quite the same in Godfall, right? They're different.
No, it isn't quite the same. Weak points, just for a little history on Godfall, weak points were one of the first combat systems that we really, as a team, collectively bought into. This is a system that we've been developing for years now, and tuning and just trying to get it exactly right. And so, what are weak points? Like you said, there's nothing that's there's nothing misleading about weak points. They're exactly what they sound like. They're vulnerabilities that the player can see on the enemy. Now, the way in which weak points are triggered typically is whenever an enemy attacks you. After that attack, there will be, you're used to something like this, a short recovery window afterwards where they're recovering. This is typically the point in the enemy's attack in which a weak point is going to be exposed. And if the player exploits the weak point, they're essentially going to have a reticle that they can aim. Because we didn't want Godfall to just be kind of a blind hack and slash where you're kind of just button mashing and working your way through enemies. We wanted there to be a precision element that players can choose to engage with. So there's this idea that you aim your reticle, you point it at the weak point, and if you attack while that weak point is up, you're going to quote unquote exploit the weak point, deal bonus damage, potentially CC the enemy, whether it be a knockdown or something else. And that's kind of how weak points work out of the gate. It's just a way to do an empowered attack on the enemy and exploit that weakness. However, once you start to dig into our loot and how that can add layers to this, now the weak point can serve as a trigger, where it's whenever you exploit a weak point, if you're wearing a certain, let's say, amulet, for example, you might heal. Or if you're wielding a certain weapon, you might trigger projectiles firing from that weak point and hitting nearby enemies, or dealing explosive AoE damage. There's these different kind of triggers that we can associate with the weak point to reward that playstyle. But again, then you as a player have to choose, I want to index into a quote-unquote weak point build.
Of course. Okay, that sounds really cool. I like the idea of the sort of aiming component. So I guess we obviously saw that in the trailer with the polearm being thrown. So I mean, are all the weapons thrown? Like, how's it going to look if I go to throw a warhammer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually in the trailer, if you pay very particular, I don't remember the exact timestamp, so you'll have to excuse me, but there is a moment where Aegis Horn actually throws his hammer around him and does this big AoE twirl.
I was going to ask that, yeah. Okay.
So we wanted, this was one of the greatest challenges of designing our weapon classes, was we want them to all feel varied, of course, and we want them to all serve distinct purposes, but we don't want their tool set to be so limited that one does something really, really well that other weapon classes just can't do. A good example is the dichotomy that you just pointed out. If the polearm can be thrown, then it has this, soft ranged component. What happens if the warhammer doesn't have any range at all? Like, does that make it useless? Does that make it the polearm's always the dominant choice? These were kind of the design challenges we were faced with and we had to solve for. So kind of the compromise is, some weapons are going to do certain things better than others. That's a given. But we try to make sure that all of the weapon classes are balanced in the tools that they have at their disposal, which is why you're seeing, Aegishorn throw his giant warhammer. So he has some kind of range with that weapon class.
Oh, that was cool. Well, it's interesting because the way that he throws it horizontally in a circle, right? So does that mean that... Is it, technically speaking, possible to expose, if you were fighting a group of enemies, could you expose all their weak points at the same time? And in theory, swing a hammer around?
Great question. Not quite, because at the end of the day, to exploit a weak point, the reticle does have to be aimed on it, right? So with only one reticle, that would be, man, that would be so
that would be awesome.
Just, split out your reticle. Yeah, right. So, something to think about. Something to bring back to the design team, but right out of the box, unfortunately, nothing too crazy like that.
No, that's fair. Okay, fair enough. But so obviously then, so in combat, you're obviously going to build around it. So how would you look to kind of exploit a weak point like most effectively? Like, say if I'm in a kind of a typical combat flow, like I run into an enemy, like what would be the kind of typical like efficient flow?
Yeah, so this is going to be more of a patient play style. Like I said before, the point of weak points is to really prevent button mashing. And again, like all play styles are kind of welcomed in Godfall, and I think you shouldn't feel limited based on the tools you have at your disposal. It's more you as a player have to choose what tools are most interesting to me, are most fun for me to engage with, and that's what I'm going to index in. That's what I'm going to go for. So for weak points, the best way to attack them is really to play more of a patient style. Again, they're only going to be active if you're playing defensively. So naturally, you're going to need to maneuver around your enemy's attacks, but you're also going to need to stay close enough. You can't just spam dodge away because the weak point's only going to be up for a very brief window. I mean, we're talking recovery windows of, depending on the difficulty of the enemy, we're probably talking 1 to 3 seconds. Like you got to be pretty reactive to this stuff. We've balance tested it. It's fair, but you can't be half a screen away, run up to an enemy, and their weak point's still going to be there as they're locomoting towards you. Like, no, it's just that recovery window. So it's making sure that you're playing defensively, but still close enough to the enemies to be able to jump on that opportunity.
Okay. Is there any kind of like loot payoff, like destroy, like, using weak points or anything? Like, will that amplify your potential drops, or is there any kind of thing like that?
That's a great question. So the way that we designed our missions is like similar to what you've probably seen in other games similar to Godfall. Is you're going to have optional objectives for your missions, right? So you could have an optional objective, soul shatter X amount of enemies, exploit X number of weak points, stuff like that. So that is a way, but no, exploiting a weak point doesn't directly correlate to the loot you drop. Where if you exploit a weak point, then that always means rarer drops. Nothing like that.
No, that's fair enough. And does that mean that also weak points will be not just on your regular trash modes, but also bosses?
Yes, yes, and we won't get too much into the unique use cases of weak points, but again, this was one of the systems we designed very, very early on in Godfall's lifetime, so we were able to spend a lot of time kind of experimenting and seeing what feels right, and we do try to use them in our boss encounters in meaningful and unique ways.
That's going to be cool. Okay, looking forward to that. So yeah, weak points, there's definitely more to it than just attack the weak point for massive damage. So obviously outside that, moving on from there, we then got like Breach is another new mechanic, right? So how does this one work?
Of course. So we got to talk about CC in a game like this, right? You need the ability to control the battlefield, to control your enemies. And when we're talking about this many versus one, you need to be able to slow down the onslaught of their attacks. And CC is a way in which to do that, of course. So Breach is the primary CC mechanism in Godfall. So the way Breach works is as you're attacking an enemy, not only are you depleting their health bar, but you're also filling their Breach bar. And if you kind of want to imagine the UI in your head, the health bar would be on top, Breach bar would be kind of a smaller bar on the bottom, something that we're fairly familiar with. So as this bar gets filled up, the enemy, once it's completely filled, is breached. They go into a stunned state, and at this point, they're vulnerable to a takedown, in which the player can trigger a unique animation that will deal a massive amount of damage to the enemy, and in most cases, just straight up execute them, kill them, defeat the enemy. So the idea of Breach is kind of twofold. One, you want to be able to control the battlefield, you want to be able to CC your enemies, and then two, you want that nice big payoff of when they are breached, when they are on the ground stunned, you're able to just immediately target that enemy, take them out of the battle, and then move on to the next enemy, and kind of thin out the troops. And then again, similar to weak points and similar to really every mechanism we're going to talk about today, both breach and takedowns directly tie to our loot, right? So when you take down an enemy, you might be wearing a piece of loot that again has one of those triggers, and it could be a unique trigger like an explosion that plays when you take down an enemy, or it could be, again, like one of the simpler ones: heal health every time you take down an enemy, heal health every time you breach an enemy. These are the kind of loot drops that you could see.
Okay, and to kind of reference like a clip that people might have seen, say in the trailer, like the moment when Silvermane kind of wrestle something to the ground, and then kind of would that be a takedown from breach?
That would be a takedown, correct.
Oh, okay, awesome. All right.
And pretty much every enemy in the game can be taken down. So one of those unique takedown animations, you'll see them across the cast of Godfall's characters.
Okay, and does that mean that so obviously now we start thinking about the way we construct a build. So if we're talking about maybe we build like a breach focused build, will we then be looking at, say, gear pieces that might mean that we can fill breach bars faster so we can get to takedown sooner?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of have this idea of primary and secondary traits, and your secondary traits are going to be those kind of stat sheets, right? Increase breach damage, stuff like that, reduce cooldowns, and then your primary traits are going to give you those triggers where it's like when you breach the enemy, this is that big payoff. And then what's really satisfying in Godfall combat is when you can stack triggers. And one thing that I want to be pretty clear on is when you're developing a build in Godfall, you don't really need to over-index into any one particular mechanic. It's not like you need to be a dedicated breach build. You can, and you could just go all in on that and try to boost that as much as possible. But really, more often than not, you're kind of dipping between multiple play styles and trying to create that happy hybrid that's perfect for exactly how you want to play.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds cool. I mean, I feel like I want to over-index just into like a guy that can just stun things. I just want to be with my big hammer and then just want to take everything down. That's going to be me. But yeah, no,
you sound like a breach guy.
Definitely. I mean, it's got to be. Like if you wield a massive hammer, you kind of just have to be up in something's face, right? So it's but I guess sort of semi-linked to that, we've also got Soul Shatter, which is kind of somewhat related, right? So then this is like taking that to the next level. So what do we know about this?
Yeah, so to avoid Godfall jargon for 2 seconds and just talk it as like what is Soul Shatter? If you want to think of Soul Shatter, think of it as like a finisher bar. I think that'll help clarify what I'm going to get into here. So we've talked about the enemy's health bar, we've talked about the enemy's breach bar. Now we're going to talk about this idea of Soul Shatter, which is as you're hitting the enemy, not only are you filling up the breach bar, not only are you taking down their health, but as you take down their health, you're also filling up their Soul Shatter bar, which is their health bar, but it's kind of working from right to left, where it's slowly filling up and becoming white. And that's, filling up your Soul Shatter damage, or your finisher damage, right? And then once the enemy's health bar is completely white, that's when you can trigger a Soul Shatter. You trigger a Soul Shatter by doing a power attack. So light attacks won't trigger it. You need to actually do a heavy attack onto the enemy to trigger the Soul Shatter, to consume that Soul Shatter bar. At which point, when you do this, it literally creates an internal explosion within the enemy, and they explode on sight. You might have seen this in previous trailers. If you've seen any enemies just exploding, that's a Soul Shatter.
Oh, okay.
And again, right out of the box, right out of the tutorial, what the player learns is its use case is for finishing off enemies. It's that finisher bar. But again, and now I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but again, we're going to tie loot traits into Soul Shatter, and you have the ability to index into that. You can increase the rate at which you build up Soul Shatter. You can have various triggers for what happens when a Soul Shatter occurs. Are there secondary explosions that deal AoE ailment damage? Are you buffing yourself every single time you Soul Shatter an enemy? These are the kind of loot traits that you can expect to see tied to this mechanic.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. It almost sort of like in my head, it makes me think that maybe like Breach and Soul Shatter kind of almost go like hand in hand. So you might like index into both of those, right? Because you go from a takedown, and then I would imagine if a takedown doesn't finish them, maybe it'll probably build Soul Shatter bar potentially.
A takedown, so the damage done during takedowns doesn't directly fill up the Soul Shatter health bar. So that is an important point of clarification. No, if you do a takedown and it doesn't actually kill the enemy, it just does a large amount of damage and they get back up.
Okay.
It wouldn't be safe to assume that the Soul Shatter bar it might be filled up. It might be filled up from past light attacks, but it wouldn't actually be filled up from that takedown action.
Okay. No, fair enough. And again, I guess same kind of thing with like Soul Shatter. It's going to be, if you were to get any, say, loot benefits from it, it's still all going to be a case of like, if it was an objective, say, Soul Shatter enemy, it's not going to be like, if you do a finisher, you're going to get a chance at like a better loot drop or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've got 3 tiers so far. We've got weak points, breach, and Soul Shatter, but then we've got Polarity Attacks. So this sounds cool.
All right. Yeah, Polarity Attacks are a lot of fun. So taking a step back and thinking about what we've talked about with Godfall so far, one key element is that in a player's loadout, they have 2 weapons. And this number was very particular. This was something that the design team literally debated for well over a year. How many weapons should the player be allowed to bring into missions with them? This was a really important question for us to answer, because as you know, we have the 5 weapon classes, and of course we want to encourage players to try them all out. We want to encourage variety in gameplay. We don't want folks to feel stuck with just one weapon or stuck with one play style. But at the same time, we don't want choice paralysis. We don't want you to have so many weapons that you don't know which way to go. It's difficult to decide which use case is best for which weapon. So we wanted to help guide that a little bit to avoid that choice paralysis. So Polarity Attacks was kind of the baby that came out of those debates and came out of that discussion. And it was, we want to encourage players to utilize both weapons in their loadouts. So we decided 2 was a good number to roll with. And then the idea behind Polarity Attacks is, as you're using whichever weapon you have equipped, your unequipped weapon is charging up. And you'll see this in the UI screen. In the bottom right corner, that second weapon it'll be a smaller icon, but it'll be hollowed out and it'll be slowly filling up a blue bar. And once the blue bar on that weapon is fully charged, it'll have some lightning effects around it, you'll be able to see. That's when you know that your Polarity Attack is ready to go. To trigger the Polarity Attack, you have to swap your weapons, which will release a Polarity Shockwave that deals damage to nearby enemies, and then also boosts the damage you're doing on the weapon you just swapped to for a short period of time. So it's this idea that as you're going through combat, you're building a polarity, you swap weapons, you have a buff, big AoE blast, and then again, you're wailing on enemies, building a polarity. And again, if we're thinking about builds, archetypes for that, if you were to index into loot that increases polarity buildup or reduces polarity cooldown, then you could start rapidly swapping between weapons at a pretty fast cadence. So in a single encounter, you might swap between your weapons multiple times, releasing multiple polarity attacks, dealing this massive AoE damage, and having a lot of fun while doing so.
Would it then? Yeah, I mean that sounds awesome. I mean, would it then hypothetically be possible? Because if you get a damage buff, how long is that going to last? Because my train of thought now is could I make a build where I've basically got 100% uptime on my polarity buff if I can get a fast enough charge rate?
You probably could. The polarity duration, you'd have to play with cooldowns and you'd have to kind of get it exactly right. There would be some tinkering involved to get that to work exactly as you're describing. But the polarity duration out of the box is long, 30 seconds. Okay. Nice. So yeah, I mean, if you're able to charge it up and avoid cooldowns, then yeah, in theory, you'd be able to just keep swapping, keep that polarity buff up. That would probably, that'd be what you would expect from a late game or end game build.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, okay.
It's when you can really achieve that sweet moment of victory where it's everything's working just as intended.
That's gonna be awesome. Can I also, technically speaking, swap between the same weapon twice? Can I have 2 hammers?
That is a good question. No, right now, out of the box, you cannot have 2 of the same weapon class. I see where you're going with that, but you just exploited another big debate that we had on the design team for quite some time, and without going into too much detail on this, there are definitely some limitations with how the weapon arts work for each weapon class, where if we were to allow you to stack that same weapon class twice, could potentially break some things.
Fair enough, yeah. No, that makes sense. And obviously, it is nice that... It's funny because obviously I'm... In other games, I'm typically a sword and shield guy. So obviously the sword initially was drawn to me, but I then also just wield a massive hammer. So at least knowing that I'll be able to use a couple of weapons is nice. So no, that sounds really cool. That actually, I like the idea of that kind of dynamic flow. Obviously we've seen that in a few of the gameplay clips. We've seen some quick swaps on the fly. So to get some context for that is really cool. So I guess sort of following off there. So the last part of the arsenal now, outside of the weapons, is obviously the shield. So we've kind of seen some stuff from this already. We've seen some of the shield behavior, but kind of sort of top level, are there any sort of additional shield moves that maybe we haven't necessarily touched on? Because in the trailer we saw sort of a stomach punch for one of them. There's also one where it looked like the shield guy did a Shoryuken, which is awesome. Yeah, so the tools that the shield has right out of the gates, again, leaving the tutorial, what can your shield do? Very simple. You can do the simple block action, which is straightforward. You can use the block action to parry, where if you time the block just right with the enemy attacks, you do that. And then the attack that you have with the shield out of the gate is shield throw, which we've seen in multiple videos now. Pretty simple. Player throws the shield, can hit multiple enemies, so there's a little bit of an AoE damage aspect to that, and a ranged aspect as well, of course. Now, where the shield gets interesting is, well, again, similar to everything else that we've already covered, there's going to be loot associated to various shield abilities, right? So when you throw your shield, there might be loot that rewards that action. But in another vein, the skill grid allows you to expand what your shields can do. If you decide to invest skill points into shield abilities, you can
essentially bolster or improve these abilities. So a couple of examples, something that you might have seen in the recent trailers. One way that you can upgrade your skill grid is that when you throw the shield, if you time it just right and press the button as reactivate it as the shield hits the enemies, you can zoom yourself to that enemy that you hit. Okay. So there's a nice little traversal element, some displacement, being able to maneuver the battlefield. That was important. So that's more of an aggressive way to use the shield. Alternatively, you could use the shield throw, and if you get the right node on the skill grid, you throw the shield, and then when it returns to you, if you reactivate as it returns to the player, you'll release a shockwave around you. So again, staying back and kind of in the back line, dealing that AoE damage. That's another option. So really the idea with the shield was we just wanted to create a fun tool that could do a little bit of everything. It can do a little bit of defense, a little bit of offense, and really the shield on its own without cooldowns would be completely busted and overpowered. So the limitation of the shield is it kind of can do everything, but you have to maneuver around your cooldowns and really kind of work around that.
Okay. Does it have a charge component similar to Polarity? The reason I asked that is because there's a clip, I think it's about 40 seconds into the new gameplay trailer, and it happens super quickly. So Aegis Horn is wielding the hammer, and then as mid-attack, he very quickly brings the shield out, and literally as he brings it out, I guess he parries an attack because there's a white flash, but it's literally split second. It's like he hasn't even held it. He's literally just pulled the shield, and then I've seen a flash. So is that a last-minute parry, or...?
So that would be a last-minute parry. Exactly. That was a perfectly timed parry, mid-combo, switch the shield really quick for the defensive. Yeah. And the way in which we let players kind of queue up their actions, you can react to the enemies rapidly like that, very quickly. Split moment.
That sounds okay. That's really cool because it's funny. You always think about shields having to prep them and stuff, but the fact that this is literally happening a split second, that's I guess that's going to be where there's going to be that kind of skill mastery, easy to kind of pick up, but hard to master sort of thing. So yeah, all right. Shield, and the fact that everything's got a shield. I mean, again, I remember the very first trailer before I obviously kind of spoken to you and learned about it and stuff. I was like, oh, it must be sword and shield, but it's no, everything's got a shield, a hammer and a shield.
You can have your shield with the Warhammer. Don't even worry about it.
That's gonna be
the dream.
It's definitely the dream. All right, cool. So that's shield stuff, which looks very, very awesome. Obviously, I know Archon mode we've kind of touched on already, sort of how it's happened previously, but maybe we can kind of talk just a little bit more about that in the vein of Aegis Horn, because obviously Aegis Horn was recently shown, looks incredibly cool. I still stand by what I say, every time you show a new Valorplate, I'm like, how do they keep getting cooler? You're gonna have to run out of them soon. What does Aegis Horn do?
So Aegis Horn is your supportive tank with a twist. And we'll get into what that twist is a little bit later. But to start, whenever you equip the Aegis Horn Valorplate, you get a flat 5% damage reduction. This isn't tied to Archon mode, this isn't tied to anything like that. That's just the inherent trait you get when you equipped Aegis Horn. Then, when you activate Archon Fury, you summon 3 allies alongside of you, and this is to enforce this idea that he's creating a beefier front line for the team. So he does that, and he also creates an area of effect, and nearby allies, and himself included, will have a massive amount of damage reduction. I mean, we're talking 30 to 50%, so inherently everybody within range of Aegis Horn becomes significantly more tanky. And then as Aegis Horn and his allies are hit by enemies, they will fire homing projectiles from themselves and deal physical damage to nearby enemies. Kind of like this idea of thorns, right? As enemies deal damage to me, I project some of that damage back. So again, Aegis Horn, the idea here is that he's beefy, he's frontline, and he's absorbing damage for the team. But I also wanted to get a little bit into augments and augment constellation, because Keith Lee, our director, had a great interview with Gamescom recently, and they started to dig into this, but I wanted to shed a little bit more light on how it specifically relates to Aegis Horn. So to start, and to lay a foundation here, in Godfall you have 3 basic attributes, and these should be all pretty familiar to folks within this genre. You have Might, Vitality, and Spirit. And we don't need to dig into the nitty-gritty there, but Might, it's going to be tied to your DPS. Vitality, it's tied to your tankiness. And Spirit, this is more tied to cooldown reduction and unique damage sources. So those are the 3 primary attributes. Now, every single augment that you get is associated with one of those 3 attributes. So you could have Might augments, Vitality augments, or Spirit augments, or if you want to think about it, red augments, green augments, and blue augments that are associated with these attributes. And then every Valorplate has a unique augment constellation, which will have 10 or so nodes that you can plug augments into. Now these nodes are going to be various colors, red, green, and blue. And the idea here is that you have to do a little color matching. You have to put red augments in red slots, so on and so forth. And depending on the Valorplate you have equipped, you'll have more or less slots for particular colors. So again, going to the Aegis Horn example, Aegis Horn indexes into Vitality first, that's kind of its primary trait, and then Might as a secondary. So you'll have lots of Vitality augments, you'll be boosting your health, becoming much tankier, but you'll also have plenty of room to put into Might, and then you'll be increasing your DPS. So again, don't think of Aegis Horn as a dedicated tank necessarily. He definitely has the ability to do some damage, but he's one of the beefiest Valorplates out there.
That sounds really cool. Like that aligns with my playstyle. I mean, I've definitely more recently been adopting the kind of tanky playstyle. So that sounds cool. And I guess of course, going alongside Valorplates, you can't have, damage without weapons, and that's my kind of way to try and segue into the next question, which of course is to ask about, can we get any more details on how the polearm and the warhammer play? Because of course, recently we've had a look at the kind of combat video, got some more insight into the behavior of the dual blade and the longsword, so it'd be great to kind of like learn a little bit more about the hammer and the polearm.
Yeah, so for the polearm, like you saw in the video and like you've already pointed out, the big kind of selling point of the polearm is that it can be thrown. It's one of that's kind of like the unique selling point of that weapon, is it has more range than any other of the 5 weapon classes out of the gate. Obviously, the shield has the shield throw, we know that, but that's kind of a unique case and it's attached to cooldowns. But the polearm itself, it has that javelin throw move. So the fact that the polearm just has more range, if we're talking about, we covered a lot of different mechanics. How would I associate the polearm with those mechanics? What mechanics would this weapon class play with best? I would say weak points, right? Because polearm, it allows you to keep your distance from the enemy. You have lots of range. So you're able to keep that comfortable distance where after you avoid an attack from the enemy, you're still comfortably close enough where if you target that weak point, you can get it with the polearm. You'll just be able to reach while keeping that safe distance. So polearm really kind of specializes that, keeping enemies at a healthy distance. If you're a really tanky Valorplate, you might not want the polearm. You might still. Again, we don't really limit playstyle. We really kind of let you do whatever you want and encourage that. But if you're trying to min-max, the polearm might be for more of a unit that's trying to stay away, keep that safe distance. Okay.
What about hammer? Are we just talking? Is hammer more just like big AOE damage? Because obviously you've got like the big hits, or is there any like unique kind of special moves for it that maybe we haven't seen yet or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, with the Warhammer, we saw the spitting move. That was a pretty unique. I would say that's one of the more odd ones out there with the Warhammer or unique. But yeah, like you said, the hammer, it's all about Hulk smash. It's all about doing big AOE breach damage. And really just trying to demolish large groups of opponents and have that CC. As a result, sometimes the damage is a little bit lower than or I shouldn't even say damage, but the DPS is going to be lower than what perhaps a dual blade where you're constantly attacking. But the payoff is that you're much more easily able to control the battlefield with Warhammer.
Okay, I see what you mean. Actually, question on that one as well, because so obviously there's a dash component for everyone, no matter what weapon you're using, you can dash out. One of the interesting things from the new gameplay trailer is that, for example, the hammer's got one move like this overhead swing, which animation-wise is quite a commitment. It's quite a slow move, but you can dash out in the middle of it and then dash back into that same move. So is there? Because normally you kind of used to in these kind of games where you're like, all right, this is a move that is high commitment and I'm going to be left open. But it seems like from what I've seen so far in Godfall that you can dash out of anything.
Yeah, you really can. It is the case. I mean, there are probably a few exceptions that you can attach to that. I don't want to necessarily say that's the rule. You can dodge out of every single, but more often than not, again, Godfall is meant to be an offense-focused game. We want to encourage offense. We want to encourage aggro, and we want you to really get into the thick of it. So yeah, we don't want too many moves that feel like overcommitments where you feel punished for playing that way, because it would feel really bad in Godfall if you had to wind up for this 10-second and people are just wailing on you, knocking you down, interrupting you. It just wouldn't feel good. So to really sell that many against one, we needed to make sure that the player is able to essentially not get too caught up in this idea of overcommitment.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Fair enough. So they're all the kind of the core things, but we've got I appreciate that you've given me a lot of your time, but I've got to round out with three big questions to finish up. So absolutely. Number one, obviously, we also got a trailer for the fancy new Warhammer, which is incredibly cool. Which was called, I forget the name of it. It was Twin Omen. That's it. Yeah. Yes. So yes. Do all weapons have names, or are we? When I'm looking at Twin Omen, am I looking at what would be like the game's equivalent to legendary weapons, and then obviously below that you'll just have greens and blues and purples?
Every single weapon in Godfall has a unique name. It has unique lore associated with it. I work very closely with our lore master Ming. He's an incredible writer. He was my dungeon master in a D&D campaign we ran for like 2 years. That's how I met him before we were working on Godfall together. I just met him as a dungeon master. Nice. And he was such an incredible storyteller. Well, anyways, we won't get into that, but Ming's incredible. Every weapon has a unique name, has unique lore, ties into the universe, ties into the campaign and what you're experiencing as you're playing Godfall. And yeah, it goes back to this idea that we want, we talked about this a lot in our first chat. We want every single weapon in Godfall to feel meaningful in some way. Even like, of course, in a looter, you're going to pick up loot that you look at and you're like, I'm playing Breach. This is a long sword that does soul shatter damage. Of course, you're going to not care about it. But that weapon should still have an identity. And you should still be excited that you got to see that weapon, experience that weapon. Even if you're not going to play, even if you're not that excited for what it does, it's still like, wow, what an interesting piece. I want to read about this. I want to learn more about this exotic piece that I just found. And every single weapon in the game is framed that way.
Okay, that's really cool. That's really cool. On the topic of weapons as well, obviously, we mentioned before, you mentioned how, like, you could, in theory, take a weapon you like early game and boost it all the way if you wanted to. The reason I bring that up again is because, obviously, in light of Zero's sword being shown, some people were like, you're typically used to, if you kind of get like one of those sort of collaboration swords, they are often useful early game, but not necessarily later. If somebody really liked Zero's sword, could they take that to end game?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to limit what the capabilities of that weapon are. I think there's nothing that feels worse than getting this really cool piece of gear that you're super excited for, enjoying it for 2 hours, and then essentially parting ways with it and never seeing it again.
Yeah.
Especially for a weapon as epic as Zero, as important as we know as that is to our Borderlands fans and our friends over at Gearbox. Yeah, that weapon's gonna. If you want to hold on to that weapon, if you want to be a Zero longsword one trick, you can do that.
Nice, awesome. And then I'll save the best question till last because I love my Viking stuff, right? And then when you drop that second video, when you drop that second video, we saw inside the sanctum and you were panning around just casually. I like how you just like, I'm just gonna drop this in the corner and not say anything about it. I've been informed that this guy is called Armistice, this Viking-looking guy with the giant horns. Please tell me about him. Please tell me he's the greatest Valorplate of all time.
I would love to tell you about Armistice. As soon as I watched your video and I saw you highlight it, I immediately reached out to the team and I was like, you got to let me talk to him about Armistice. It was not planned to be revealed. This was going to be one of those things that you just like when you got Godfall, that was one of the ones that you learned about that wasn't, but like I was like, I got to talk to Arekkz about Armistice. So let me start with like what his theme is, because as you notice, all these Valorplates kind of have central themes, whether it be tied to their Archon mode or their Augment constellation. So Armistice is all about breach damage, which is really good for a Warhammer main because
it's
those
made
things
for me.
match made in heaven. So this is your Valorplate. This is what I assume you will be playing as
100%.
on day one. So Armistice, he specializes in breach damage. Obviously, on paper, instinct would say, hey, that means he's a Warhammer guy. Again, we don't limit playstyle, so by no means will Armistice players be limited to just playing Warhammer, but certainly there is some harmony right out of the gate between those two. But one thing that might not be clear from Armistice, I know that you had made the observation, this is the tanky boy. He's big, he's beefy. You're close, but he's not one of our balanced Valorplates. He's one of our specialized Valorplates, but he doesn't specialize in vitality. He specializes in might. So this is like big AoE damage, breach. Like this is the damage guy. This is the DPS guy. And what I mean by that is he has the most augment slots for might augments. So this is the Valorplate that's going to give you the most opportunity to just pour augments into increasing your vitality, or apologies, into increasing your might. So that's really his specialty. So this guy's he's going to hit heavy. He's going to be doing CC. And he's going to be a lot of fun to play.
Ooh, okay.
And of course, I'll throw in a bonus. His Archon mode, of course, it increases breach damage, so I think that's pretty obvious out of the gate here. But then also, when you activate it, he literally breaches all enemies around him. So that's kind of a really unique one where it's just like you're talking about activating multiple weak points at once. I couldn't give you that, but breaching multiple enemies at once, you can't do that. And Armistice is your guy.
Okay. Oh, I was already sold, but now I'm a happy guy. I'm a happy guy. That is me day one.
I'm glad we could throw that win here in the end for you at the end. That's a real sweet one to end on.
That was very cool. I can't wait to see him in gameplay now. But yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And thank you again for having me. These chats are a blast. Have a great time here.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the time. It's always good to chat Godfall. I can't wait till we get to play, and then we can chat and play. But that'll be good. But for the time being, I appreciate you're very busy working on the game, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys that are watching enjoy the video. Again, if you have any questions, by always let me know, because maybe in the future, if we chat again, I can bring more questions. But for the time being, thank you so much for joining me. Catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can join the Arekkz Gaming Discord. We've got an awesome community over there with so many different channels for you to chat loads of different topics and different games. I'm in there, the team's in there if you guys want to chat with us, find people to play with. It's just in general a great place to be. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads.